A millionaire marries a disabled black woman as part of a cruel bet, thinking it's all a joke. But what happens on their wedding day leaves him utterly speechless. Her resilience, her secret, and the shocking truth about who she really is will turn his life upside down. How does she rise above betrayal? And can he ever make things right? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The neon sign of May's Diner cast a warm glow through the windows, painting the checkered floor in shades of red and blue. Inside, the clinking of plates and murmur of conversations filled the air, mixing with the sweet scent of apple pie and coffee. At a corner booth, Derek Johnson lounged against worn leather seats, his Letterman jacket draped carelessly over his broad shoulders. "Another round of fries?" a waitress called out as she passed their table. "We're good," Derek replied, flashing his signature smile that usually got him extra servings. Tonight, though, his charm fell flat as Kevin Harris's words hung heavy in the air. Kevin leaned forward, his dark eyes glinting with mischief. "You know who I'm talking about, right? Simone Williams, the one who owns that little bookstore downtown?" Derek's fingers tightened around his soda glass. He knew exactly who Simone was. Everyone in their small town did. She'd made quite a name for herself, turning a failing bookstore into the most popular spot downtown, all while dealing with her recovery from a terrible accident. "Leave it alone, Kevin," Derek muttered, trying to sound disinterested. But the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Oh, come on!" Kevin's voice carried across the diner, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Mr. Smooth Talker suddenly getting shy. What's wrong? Afraid she'll turn you down?" The other guys at the table snickered, and Derek felt heat creeping up his neck. He'd dated his fair share of girls, sure, but Simone was different. She had this way about her, this quiet strength that made his usual pickup lines feel cheap and hollow. "It's not about that," Derek protested, pushing his half-eaten burger away. "She's been through enough without becoming some stupid bet." Kevin's eyebrows shot up. "Since when did you grow a conscience? The Derek I know never backs down from a challenge." He pulled out his wallet, slapping a $100 bill on the table. "Put your money where your mouth is. I bet you can't get her to marry you within 6 months." The diner seemed to grow quieter, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in Derek's ears. He stared at the money, then at Kevin's smug face. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to walk away, but pride, that old familiar demon, whispered louder. "You're really something else, you know that." Derek's voice came out rough. "Making bets about someone's life like it's some kind of game." "Sounds like chicken talk to me," one of the other guys chimed in, making clucking noises. Kevin spread his hands wide. "Oh, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You couldn't handle a girl like that. She's way out of your league. Too smart, too independent. Face it, buddy, you're just not man enough." The words stung more than Derek wanted to admit. His whole life, people had written him off as just another pretty face with nothing substantial to offer. Even his own family didn't expect much from him beyond his charming smile and easygoing nature. The ice in his glass clinked as his hand shook slightly. Something inside him snapped. That same reckless impulse that had gotten him into trouble so many times before. Derek grabbed his wallet, pulled out his own 100, and slammed it down next to Kevin's. The glasses on the table rattled, and conversations at nearby booths stopped completely. "Fine," he growled, rising to his feet. His voice carried through the now silent diner as he declared, "I'll do it. Watch me." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and as soon as they left his mouth, Derek felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. But it was too late to take them back. Kevin's triumphant grin told him that much. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Derek walked toward Simone's house, his heart pounding with each step. Her modest white cottage stood out with its perfectly maintained flower beds and cheerful blue shutters. Even from the sidewalk, he could see her sitting on the porch, a book open in her lap. Derek wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, trying to summon his usual confidence. But something about Simone made him feel different, smaller somehow. She sat there with such quiet dignity, her braided hair catching the sunlight, her brown skin glowing in the morning light. As he approached the white picket fence, she looked up from her book. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on him with unmistakable suspicion. The pair of crutches beside her chair seemed to mock his foolish mission. "Can I help you?" Simone's voice carried clearly across the yard, neither welcoming nor hostile, just cautious. Derek cleared his throat. "Hi, I'm Derek Johnson." He pushed open the gate, wincing at its slight squeak. "Question is, what brings you to my porch at 9 in the morning?" The rehearsed speech he'd practiced all night suddenly evaporated from his mind. He climbed the 3 porch steps, keeping a respectful distance from her chair. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, messing it up completely. "I've seen you around town. At your bookstore." Simone's eyebrow arched slightly. "Have you? Funny, I've never seen you inside." "Well, no," he admitted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "But I've walked past it, many times. And I've always thought, you seem—" "You're not here to discuss my business hours, are you?" Simone set her book aside, folding her hands in her lap. The morning breeze rustled the leaves of the maple tree in her yard, filling the awkward silence. "No, I'm not." Derek took a deep breath. This was usually so easy for him, talking to women, charming them. But Simone's steady gaze made him feel transparent, as if she could see right through him. "I came here because I think we should get married." The words hung in the air like lead balloons. Simone's expression didn't change for a moment, as if she was waiting for the punchline. He hurried on, words tumbling out. "I know it sounds crazy. We don't really know each other. But I've watched you from afar, and I think you're amazing. The way you run your store, how you've overcome everything. I just thought maybe we could—" He trailed off as Simone's shoulders began to shake. At first, he thought she might be angry, but then a rich, melodious sound filled the air. She was laughing, not unkindly, but with genuine amusement. "Are you for real?" she asked, wiping tears from her eyes. For 3 straight days, Derek showed up at Simone's porch like clockwork. On Monday, he brought daisies, their yellow centers bright against crisp white petals. Simone had simply shaken her head, but he noticed she put them in water. "You're either incredibly persistent or just plain crazy," she said, arranging the flowers in a mason jar while seated at her porch table. "Maybe a little of both," Derek admitted, his usual cockiness giving way to something more genuine. Tuesday brought a box of chocolate-covered strawberries from the local candy shop. Simone raised an eyebrow when she saw them. "How did you know these were my favorite?" "I asked around," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Miss Martha at the candy store says you get them every Friday after closing your bookshop." Something flickered in Simone's eyes, surprise perhaps that he'd made the effort to learn about her preferences. On Wednesday, he arrived with a wrapped package. Simone unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. "I noticed you reading it the other day," Derek explained, "but your copy looked pretty worn out." Simone ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "You're really not giving up, are you?" "Not planning to," he replied, settling into the chair beside her. The morning sun warmed the porch, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of her flowering jasmine. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. "There are plenty of other women in town who jump at the chance to date you." Derek considered his words carefully. "Because you're different. You don't try to be anything you're not. When I walk past your bookstore, I see how you help everyone who comes in. Kids struggling with homework, elderly folks looking for large print books. You care about people." Simone studied him, her brown eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. "And you think that's enough reason to propose marriage to a complete stranger?" "I think it's enough reason to want to get to know you better," he replied softly. She picked up her crutches and stood, moving to the porch railing. The morning light caught the subtle highlights in her braided hair as she looked out over her garden. "You know what people say about me?" she asked, not turning around. "I don't care what people say." "Maybe you should. They say I'm difficult, stubborn, that I push people away." "Good thing I'm persistent, then," Derek said with a gentle smile. Simone turned back to face him, leaning against the railing. For a long moment, she just looked at him, as if trying to solve a particularly challenging puzzle. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. One coffee date." Derek's face lit up, but before he could speak, she held up a warning finger. "You better not waste my time," she said firmly, though there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. The Bell's Corner Cafe buzzed with the gentle hum of morning conversations and the rich aroma of fresh coffee. Simone and Derek sat at a corner table near the window, where autumn sunlight streamed through the glass, warming their faces. "So," Simone said, wrapping her hands around her steaming cappuccino, "I guess you're wondering about these." She gestured to her crutches, which leaned against the wall beside their table. Derek shook his head. "Only if you want to tell me." "8 months ago I was driving home from the bookstore," Simone began, her fingers tracing patterns on the ceramic mug. "It was raining. The other driver ran a red light. They said I was lucky." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. 3 surgeries on my left leg. The doctors weren't sure I'd walk again." "But you're proving them wrong," Derek said softly. A determined smile crossed Simone's face. "Every single day. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Exercises every morning and night. The doctors say I'm making remarkable progress." "That must take incredible strength," Derek remarked, genuinely impressed. "What choice do I have?" Simone straightened in her chair. "My bookstore isn't going to run itself, and I refuse to let this define me." She reached down and adjusted one of her leg braces. "Next month I start advanced therapy. They think I might be able to walk without the crutches by spring." "That's amazing," Derek said, leaning forward. "You should see me in the pool," Simone said with a proud grin. "I'm like a fish. The water therapy has been a game changer. Makes me feel weightless, free." Derek watched as her eyes lit up, talking about her progress. The morning sun caught the warm undertones in her skin, and her enthusiasm was infectious. "I have this dream," she continued, her voice growing softer. "There's this trail behind my house that leads up to Riverside Point. Before the accident, I used to hike it every weekend. The view from up there—" She shook her head, smiling at the memory. "I'm going to climb that trail again." "I bet you will," Derek said, and he meant it. "Most people, when they hear about the accident, they get this look in their eyes. Pity. I hate that look." Simone's jaw set firmly. "But you don't look at me that way." "Because I don't see someone to pity," Derek replied. "I see someone who's fighting back." Simone studied him for a long moment, her brown eyes thoughtful. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to fade away as they held each other's gaze. Finally, she picked up her crutches and stood. "Well, I should get back to the store. New shipment of books coming in today." Derek rose to help her, but she waved him off with a smile. "I've got this." As they reached the cafe door, Simone turned to him. A hint of surprise and approval flickered across her face as she said, "Maybe you're not as shallow as you look." Derek's phone buzzed for the 5th time that evening as he sat on his apartment's worn leather couch. The screen lit up with another message from Kevin. "Our hero, saving the damsel one coffee date at a time." His stomach churned as he scrolled through the earlier messages. The group chat was filled with jokes and mocking comments about his noble mission. Someone had even created a meme with his face photoshopped onto a knight's armor. "Day 7 of Operation Wedding Bell. Any progress, Romeo?" Another message popped up. Derek tossed the phone onto the coffee table and ran his hands through his blonde hair. The morning's coffee date with Simone kept replaying in his mind. The way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her recovery, her determination, her strength. His phone buzzed again. Kevin had sent a private message. "Seriously though, bro. Don't tell me you're actually falling for her. Remember, it's just a bet. Easy $500. The words made his chest tight. He picked up the phone, then put it down again. The memory of Simone's laugh echoed in his thoughts, genuine and warm, nothing like the mocking tones of his friend's messages. Another buzz. This time it was a photo from that night at the diner, showing him slamming his drink down, his face red with wounded pride. Below it, Kevin had written, "This is why we're here, remember? Don't go soft on us now." Derek stood up and paced his small living room, the setting sun casting long shadows through the windows. On his bookshelf sat the novel Simone had recommended during their coffee date. She'd spoken so passionately about it, her hands gesturing animatedly as she described the plot. His phone lit up with yet another message. "Tick-tock, lover boy. Wedding bells await." Picking up his phone again, Derek opened his photo gallery. There was a picture he'd taken at the cafe when Simone wasn't looking. She was gazing out the window, sunlight highlighting her profile, a small smile playing on her lips. It was nothing like the cruel memes his friends were sharing. The phone buzzed once more. Kevin again. "Don't forget why you started this. You're not actually buying into her whole inspiration story, are you?" Derek slumped back onto his couch, holding his phone in both hands. The screen showed 2 conversations. The group chat full of mockery and jokes, and his recent text history with Simone, filled with genuine conversations about books, dreams, and life. His thumb hovered over the keyboard, torn between defending his growing feelings for Simone to his friends and playing along with their cruel joke to prove he could follow through on the dare. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force as he stared at the glowing screen. The morning sun cast long shadows across the park's winding paths as Derek watched Simone take careful steps forward. Her crutches lay on a nearby bench, a safety net she was determined to need less and less. "You're doing great," Derek said, walking beside her at a slow pace. His hand stayed ready to catch her if needed, though he'd learned quickly that she rarely accepted help unless absolutely necessary. Simone's face showed intense concentration as she placed one foot in front of the other. "I used to run these paths," she said, pausing to take a deep breath. 5 miles every morning before work." A bead of sweat rolled down her temple as she took another step. "The doctors said I might never walk normally again." She let out a small laugh. "Should have known better than to tell me what I can't do." Derek watched in amazement as she pushed forward, her movements becoming more confident with each step. The morning joggers and dog walkers passing by seemed to fade into the background as he focused on Simone's progress. "You know what the worst part was?" she asked, not waiting for his response. "People's pity. The way they'd look at me like my life was over." She took another determined step. "I refuse to let this hold me back." Her words hit Derek hard. He thought about the mocking messages still filling his phone, the cruel jokes his friends made about her condition. Shame crept up his neck as he remembered his own initial thoughts when he'd first approached her house. They reached a park bench, and Simone lowered herself onto it, her breathing slightly labored, but her eyes bright with accomplishment. 20 steps more than yesterday, she said proudly. Derek sat beside her, noticing how the sunlight caught the subtle golden highlights in her braids. She pulled out a small notebook from her bag and marked down her progress, her handwriting neat and precise. When I was in the hospital, she continued, closing the notebook, I made a list of all the things people said I couldn't do anymore. Been checking them off one by one. She turned to look at him, her brown eyes filled with determination. Life's too short to let other people define your limits. A group of children ran past them, their laughter echoing through the park. Simone watched them with a gentle smile. I'm going to dance at my wedding someday, she said softly. Everyone says I'm crazy for even thinking about it, but I will. Derek felt something shift inside him as he watched her. This wasn't the broken woman his friends had mockingly described. This wasn't someone to be pitied or used for a cruel bet. This was Simone, strong, determined, and more inspiring than anyone he'd ever met. She reached for her crutches, ready for another attempt. Help me up, she asked, and for the first time the request didn't feel like a concession of weakness, but a gesture of trust. As Derek gently supported her elbow, he realized the flutter in his chest had nothing to do with the dare anymore. The way she set her jaw with determination, the fierce light in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile when she achieved another goal, all of it made his heart race, in a way no bet ever could. Ready for another round? Simone asked, adjusting her grip on the crutches. Derek nodded, suddenly seeing her in a completely new light. She wasn't just part of a dare anymore. She was someone special. Someone who made him want to be better than the man who'd accepted that bet in a dimly lit diner. The late afternoon sun painted Simone's garden in shades of gold and amber. Roses and marigolds lined the narrow pathway where Derek and Simone walked together, her steps growing steadier each day. The sweet scent of blooming jasmine filled the air as they made their way to the small wooden bench beneath an old maple tree. Derek's hands trembled slightly as he helped Simone sit down. His heart hammered against his ribs, and the small velvet box in his pocket felt like it weighed a ton. He'd spent his entire savings on the ring, a simple but elegant diamond set in white gold. Your garden's beautiful, he said, his voice slightly shaky. Just like you. Simone smiled, reaching out to touch a nearby rose. My mother planted most of these flowers. After the accident, tending to them helped me heal. Gave me something to focus on besides the pain. The setting sun cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the warmth in her brown eyes. Derek took a deep breath and lowered himself to one knee in front of her. Simone's eyes widened as he pulled out the ring box. Simone Williams, he began, his voice thick with emotion. These past few weeks have shown me what real strength looks like, what determination and grace look like. He opened the box, revealing the ring. You make me want to be a better person. Will you marry me? Simone stared at the ring, then at Derek's face. Several moments passed in silence, broken only by the gentle evening breeze rustling through the maple leaves above them. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. Marriage isn't something to take lightly, Derek. I've never been more sure of anything, he replied, meaning every word despite the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. Simone's eyes glistened with tears as she studied his face. The last rays of sunlight caught the moisture in her eyes, making them sparkle. Finally, a smile spread across her face, the kind that lit up her entire being. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Derek's hand shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the dying light and throwing tiny rainbows across their joined hands. He rose from his knee and sat beside her on the bench, pulling her close. Simone leaned her head against his shoulder, both of them watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky above them, and crickets started their evening chorus in the garden. "I never thought I'd find someone who could see past." She gestured to her crutches leaning against the bench. "All of this." Derek's heart clenched. He wrapped his arm tighter around her shoulders, fighting back the wave of shame that threatened to overwhelm him. Here was this amazing woman, trusting him completely, while the truth of how their relationship began weighed heavy in his chest. As twilight settled over the garden, Simone's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. The moment was perfect, filled with joy and promise. Yet Derek couldn't fully embrace it, not with the secret he carried. "I'll make this right," he whispered, his words nearly lost in the gentle evening breeze. The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves outside the small chapel where Derek and Simone sat, going over their wedding plans. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. They'd chosen this quaint venue for its charm and accessibility, with its smooth stone pathways and gentle ramps that wound through a garden filled with late-blooming roses and chrysanthemums. "So," Simone said, adjusting her position in the wooden chair and smoothing her cotton sundress, "don't expect me to wheel down the aisle." Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she watched Derek's reaction, a slight dimple appearing in her left cheek. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking up from the guest list they'd been reviewing, his pen hovering mid-check mark. Simone's face broke into a radiant smile that lit up her entire countenance. "My physical therapy has been going better than expected. Dr. Martinez says I'm making incredible progress." She reached for her crutches and stood up carefully, her movements precise and practiced. "I've been practicing every day, and I'm going to walk down that aisle." Derek's eyes widened, his heart skipping a beat. "Are you sure? I mean, that's wonderful, but I don't want you pushing yourself too hard." "Come here," Simone said, motioning him to follow her to the center aisle. She positioned herself at the back of the chapel, gripping her crutches firmly, her knuckles whitening slightly with determination. "Watch this." With careful, measured steps, Simone began moving forward. Her movements were slower than normal walking speed, but each step was deliberate and steady, the rubber tips of her crutches making soft tapping sounds against the wooden floor. The determination on her face reminded Derek of why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place, that unwavering spirit that refused to give up. "See," she said, pausing halfway down the aisle, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "I've been working with my therapist specifically on this. We've been practicing the exact distance, the exact pace." Sweat beaded slightly on her forehead from the effort, but her smile never wavered, her eyes bright with accomplishment. Derek walked over to her, his heart swelling with emotion, his throat tight with pride. "You're amazing, you know that?" "I know," she laughed, the sound echoing off the chapel walls, then grew serious. "But I want to show you something else." She carefully handed him her crutches, her fingers brushing against his. "Stand right there." Holding the crutches, Derek watched as Simone took several unassisted steps toward him. Her movements were slower and more cautious without support, but she maintained her balance perfectly, her arms slightly extended for stability. "The doctor says I might not need the crutches at all in a few more months," she explained, reaching for his arm, her touch warm and steady. "But for the wedding, I want to walk part of the way with them and then hand them to my aunt before taking my final steps to you." Derek felt a profound sense of pride watching her practice her steps again, this time with the crutches. Each movement was a testament to her strength and perseverance. She'd taken what could have been a devastating setback and turned it into a triumph of will, just as she'd done with every obstacle life had thrown her way. "We should practice the handoff," Simone said, demonstrating how she planned to transfer the crutches smoothly to her aunt during the ceremony, her movements becoming more confident with each repetition. "I want everything to be perfect." As she continued practicing her walk, stopping occasionally to adjust her technique or catch her breath, Derek watched in admiration. Her face glowed with determination, and despite the physical effort, she looked happier than he'd ever seen her. The afternoon sun continued to paint the chapel in rainbow hues, as if nature itself was celebrating her victory. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across Derek's freshly pressed black tuxedo. His hands fidgeted with his bow tie as he stood at the altar, trying to keep his breathing steady. The familiar scent of lilies and roses filled the air, mixing with the mustiness of old wooden pews. From the back row, he could hear the muffled snickers of Kevin and his other friends. Their presence made his stomach twist with guilt, but he forced himself to focus on the moment. The rest of the chapel buzzed with quiet conversation as Simone's family and friends filled most of the seats, their excited whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Mrs. Thompson, Simone's elderly neighbor, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Simone's aunt straightened the flowers decorating the end of each pew. The small chamber orchestra began playing soft background music, their gentle melodies helping to calm Derek's nerves. Pastor Roberts gave Derek a reassuring smile and whispered, "Deep breaths, son." The wedding coordinator appeared at the chapel entrance, giving a subtle signal. The musicians transitioned into the wedding march, and the congregation rose to their feet. Derek's heart pounded against his ribs as he fixed his eyes on the doorway. The bridesmaids entered first, walking gracefully down the aisle in their burgundy dresses. Each one carried a small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. As they took their positions, Derek noticed Simone's aunt moved to stand near the halfway point of the aisle, ready for her part in the ceremony. The music swelled, and the doors opened wide. Derek's breath caught in his throat. Simone stood in the doorway, a vision in white. Her dress, elegant and flowing, complemented her warm brown skin perfectly. Tiny crystals sparkled in her braided hair, catching the light with every movement. But what struck Derek most was her radiant smile and the fierce determination in her eyes. To everyone's amazement, Simone began walking down the aisle without any assistance. No crutches, no support, just pure grace and strength. Her steps were measured and confident, defying every expectation. The crowd let out a collective gasp of surprise and admiration. Derek's jaw dropped as he watched her approach. The snickering from the back row stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. Whispers of, "Look at her go," and "Amazing," rippled through the congregation. Simone continued her steady progress, her eyes locked with Derek's, her smile never wavering. Each step was a testament to her months of hard work and unwavering determination. The bouquet in her hands trembled slightly, the only sign of the effort she was making, but her face showed nothing but joy and triumph. The murmurs of awe continued as she made her way closer to the altar. Even Pastor Roberts seemed moved by the display of strength and perseverance before him. Derek could see tears of joy in the eyes of Simone's aunt, who stood watching proudly instead of assisting as planned. The moving truck pulled away from the curb as Derek stood in front of what was now his new home, holding a cardboard box of his belongings. His eyes widened as he took in the full scope of Simone's house, or rather, what he now realized was practically a mansion. The two-story colonial-style home stretched impressively across a perfectly manicured lawn, complete with a circular driveway and a 3-car garage. "Need help with that?" Simone asked, coming down the wide front steps with ease, her recovery evident in her confident stride. This is really your house?" Derek stammered, still staring at the grand entrance with its gleaming white columns. Simone pulled out a set of keys and opened the heavy wooden front door, revealing a soaring foyer with a crystal chandelier that caught the afternoon light. The marble floors gleamed, and a curved staircase swept upward to the second floor. "Come on in," she said, trying not to laugh at his expression. "Let me give you the tour." Derek followed her through the house in a daze. The living room alone was bigger than his entire apartment, with plush leather furniture and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the backyard garden, complete with a small fountain. "Through here is my home office," Simone said, leading him into a sophisticated space with built-in bookshelves and a massive desk topped with dual monitors. "This is where I run my tech consulting business." "Tech consulting?" Derek's voice cracked slightly. He set down his box on a nearby table, careful not to disturb anything in the immaculate room. "Did you think I just sat around all day?" Simone raised an eyebrow. "I started the company right out of college. We have clients all over the country now." They continued through a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. Derek ran his hand along the smooth surface of the island, noting the expensive coffee maker and other gadgets he'd only seen in magazines. The tour led them upstairs, where Simone showed him the master bedroom suite with its walk-in closets and spa-like bathroom. Each guest room was perfectly decorated, and there was even a home gym filled with rehabilitation equipment alongside standard exercise machines. "And this," Simone said, opening the last door, "will be your office space if you want it. I know you mentioned wanting to start your own business someday." Derek stepped into the bright room, taking in the clean lines and empty desk waiting to be filled. The reality of his situation hit him hard. He'd married a successful businesswoman, someone who had built all this through her own determination and skill. Back downstairs, Derek wandered into the living room again, still trying to process everything he'd seen. The house wasn't just big. It was a testament to Simone's success and drive. He thought about his own modest savings account and the entry-level job he'd just left. Simone leaned against the door frame, watching him take it all in. Her eyes sparkled with amusement as she watched her new husband trying to reconcile this revelation with his previous assumptions. "Surprised?" she teased, her voice warm with humor. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Derek sat on the back patio, staring at the pack of cigarettes in his hand. The familiar urge to light one tugged at him, but Simone's words from breakfast still echoed in his mind. "Those things will kill you," she had said, wrinkling her nose at the smell of smoke on his clothes. "And they're not doing your future any favors either." He turned the pack over, watching the morning sunlight glint off the cellophane wrapper. The sound of the sliding glass door opening made him look up. Simone stepped out, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Here," she said, handing him one. "Something better to do with your hands." Derek accepted the coffee, breathing in its rich aroma. "I've been smoking since college. It's not that easy to just stop." "Nothing worth doing is easy." Simone settled into the chair beside him, tucking her legs underneath her. "Look at me. Learning to walk again wasn't easy, but I did it. Running my business isn't easy, but I do it." She reached over and gently took the cigarette pack from his hand. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," she said firmly. "Marriage isn't just about sharing a house. It's about building a life together. A long, healthy life." Derek watched as she tossed the pack into the nearby trash bin. The casual way she did it, like throwing away something worthless, made him pause. He'd spent years defending his habit, brushing off concerns from family and friends. "I've got some ideas," Simone continued, pulling out her tablet. "There's a great gym downtown that offers personal training. And I know a nutritionist who can help us clean up your diet. The smoking's just the start. We can work on your overall health." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Derek found himself leaning closer as she showed him workout plans and healthy meal prep ideas. The way she approached everything with such clear purpose and planning made it all seem possible. "You really think I can do all this?" he asked, scrolling through the information. "I know you can." Simone's voice held absolute conviction. "You've got potential, Derek. I see it. But potential without action is just waste." They spent the next hour mapping out a plan. Simone scheduled his first gym session, downloaded a stop-smoking app to his phone, and ordered nicotine patches. Her methodical approach helped calm his anxiety about such big changes. "Baby steps," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "We'll tackle one thing at a time." Later that afternoon, as they prepared a healthy lunch together in the kitchen, Derek found himself actually excited about the changes ahead. Watching Simone confidently move around the kitchen, showing him how to properly chop vegetables and measure portions, he realized she wasn't just trying to change him. She was trying to elevate him. "You're right," he said, setting down his knife. "About all of it. I've been stuck in the same patterns for years, telling myself it was fine. But I want to be better." Simone paused in her cooking and looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Finding sincerity there, she smiled. "That's all I needed to hear." Derek nodded, beginning to see the value in her advice. It wasn't about control or criticism. It was about growth, about becoming the best version of himself. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly ready to try. The doorbell rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Derek's stomach dropped when he saw Kevin and two other friends through the peephole. His heart rate quickened as he recognized their familiar silhouettes, and he hesitated before opening the door, plastering on a smile he didn't feel, his fingers trembling slightly on the polished brass handle. "Hey, man!" Kevin's voice boomed too loudly in the elegant foyer, bouncing off the walls like an unwelcome intruder. "Nice place you've got here. Really nice." His eyes glinted with something that made Derek uneasy. The others, Mike and Tony, whistled as they looked around at the high ceilings and expensive artwork. Their eyes darted everywhere, taking in the pristine hardwood floors and designer furniture. The chandelier above cast dancing shadows across their faces as they moved through the space like appraisers at an auction. "Thanks for coming by," Derek said stiffly, leading them to the living room. His shoulders tensed with each step across the marble tiles. The room felt smaller with their presence, their judgment hanging heavy in the air like thick smoke. "So," Mike sprawled across the leather couch, smirking, his muddy shoes barely missing the cream-colored throw pillow Simone had carefully selected. "Bet you didn't think she'd be loaded, huh? Talk about hitting the jackpot." Kevin elbowed Tony, a knowing grin spreading across his face. "Remember when he said he'd marry the girl who couldn't walk? Looks like our boy here knew exactly what he was doing." "Real smart move," Tony added with a wink that made Derek's skin crawl. "Get yourself a rich wife and live the easy life. Living the dream, aren't you?" Derek's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles turning white with the effort of controlling his anger. The cruel undertone in their voices made his skin crawl. These were the same guys he'd laughed and joked with for years, shared countless beers and football games with. But now their words felt like poison seeping into his perfect life. "It's not like that," Derek said, his voice tight and strained. "Simone's amazing. She built her own business from nothing. She worked hard for everything she has." He could hear the defensive edge in his voice and hated how it made him sound. Kevin raised his eyebrows, a predatory smile playing at his lips. "Oh, we know she's amazing. That's why we dared you to marry her, remember?" His words dripped with mockery. The words hit Derek like a physical blow, making him stumble back half a step. He glanced nervously toward the hallway, terrified Simone might overhear, might catch even a whisper of this conversation that could destroy everything they'd built together. "Look!" Mike leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper, his breath carrying the faint smell of beer. "We're just saying you lucked out. Got yourself a successful wife who can actually walk now. Plus this sweet setup." He gestured around the room with exaggerated movements. "Not bad for a dare, right?" "Stop it," Derek snapped, surprising himself with the force in his voice. The word echoed in the high-ceiling room. "Simone is the best thing that's ever happened to me. She believes in me, pushes me to be better. This isn't about money or the dare anymore." His hands shook as he spoke, emotion making his voice rough. His friends exchanged knowing looks that made his stomach turn, their smirks reflecting years of shared secrets and inside jokes that now felt toxic. They didn't understand, couldn't understand, how much things had changed, how much he had changed, how real everything had become. "Whatever you say, man." Kevin stood up, clapping him on the shoulder with too much force. "Just remember who got you here. Your friends who believed in you enough to push you towards such a profitable marriage." The pause before profitable was deliberate, calculated to wound. The others laughed as they headed for the door, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Derek followed, wanting them gone as quickly as possible. Their congratulations felt hollow, their handshakes insincere, leaving his palm feeling dirty. After they left, Derek stood in the empty foyer, their words echoing in his head like a cruel chorus. The magnificent house suddenly felt suffocating, each perfectly arranged room a testament to his deception. Every beautiful thing around him seemed to mock his deception, remind him of the lie that started it all. The framed photos of him and Simone on their wedding day stared back at him accusingly from the walls. He loved Simone, truly loved her with an intensity that sometimes scared him. But his friend's visit had brought his guilt rushing back, heavy and sharp as broken glass. The dare that had seemed like a stupid joke now felt like a weight around his neck, threatening to drag him under into the depths of his own shame. He could smell Simone's favorite vanilla candle burning somewhere in the house, and the familiar scent only made his heart ache more. That evening, Simone watched Derek from across the dinner table. He pushed his food around his plate, barely eating, lost in thought. The cheerful energy he usually brought to their meals was missing, replaced by a heavy silence. Even the soft clink of silverware against plates seemed too loud in the uncomfortable quiet. "You've been quiet since your friends left," she said softly, setting down her fork. The concern in her voice was unmistakable. "Everything okay?" Derek's head snapped up, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. "Yeah, just tired. You know how those guys can be." "Actually, I don't," Simone replied, studying his face. She traced the worry lines that had appeared around his mouth. "They seemed different today, like they were sharing some private joke." Derek's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, droplets spilling over the rim. "They're just being idiots. You know how guys can get when they're together." Simone leaned back in her chair, her keen eyes taking in his nervous movements, the way his fingers drummed against the tablecloth, how he couldn't quite meet her gaze. "Kevin kept giving you these looks. And that comment about getting me to walk, what was that about?" "Nothing," Derek said too quickly, his voice catching. He was just impressed by your recovery. Simone took a slow sip of water, the ice cubes tinkling against the glass. You know what's strange? The way they acted like they had something to do with our marriage. Almost like... She paused, watching his reaction, noting how the color drained from his face. Almost like they set it up somehow. Derek's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet room. They're just taking credit where it's not due. You know how friends can be. Do I? Simone's voice was gentle but probing, like a doctor pressing on a tender spot. Because my friends don't act like that. They don't make snide remarks or throw around weird hints. Sweat beaded on Derek's forehead, and he tugged at his collar as if it were suddenly too tight. Can we talk about something else? How was your day? Simone's expression softened, but concern lingered in her eyes, deep and searching. Derek, if something's bothering you, you can tell me. We're married now. We're supposed to trust each other. The word trust hit him like a physical blow, making him flinch visibly. I know, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I need some air. He pushed back from the table and retreated to their back porch, leaving Simone staring after him with worried eyes. The cool evening air did little to calm his racing thoughts or ease the crushing weight of guilt on his chest. Later that night, after Simone had gone to bed, Derek sat alone in their darkened living room. The same room where his friends had mocked him earlier, where Kevin's knowing smirks and pointed comments had picked at his conscience like vultures, where they'd reminded him of the terrible truth he'd been trying to forget. The walls seemed to press in around him, full of shadows and accusations. Every beautiful thing in the room, things that belonged to Simone, that she'd earned through hard work and determination, felt like evidence of his deception. The family photos on the wall, the throw pillows she'd picked out, even the small potted plant she tenderly cared for, all of it felt tainted by his lies. He buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by guilt. The darkness behind his closed eyes offered no escape. Simone's earlier questions echoed in his mind, each one a fresh wound. She was starting to notice something was wrong. She was too smart not to pick up on the strange dynamics with his friends, the weird comments, his nervous behavior. The truth was circling closer, like a predator stalking its prey. Kevin dropped by unexpectedly that afternoon while Derek was at work. Simone invited him in, more out of politeness than genuine welcome. She'd never felt completely comfortable around Derek's friend, but she was determined to make an effort. There had always been something unsettling about his smirk and the way his eyes seemed to catalog everything they saw. Nice place you've got here, Kevin said, wandering around the living room with his hands in his pockets. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the hardwood floors as he moved. Must have been quite a surprise for Derek, finding out you were loaded. Simone's eyebrows drew together, a knot of unease forming in her stomach. What do you mean by that? Oh, you know. Kevin picked up a framed photo of their wedding day, examining it with an odd smile that didn't reach his eyes. His thumb traced the edge of the silver frame. When he took the dare, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. The room suddenly felt very still, as if all the air had been sucked out. Dare? Simone's voice came out barely above a whisper, her heart beginning to race. Kevin's eyes widened in mock surprise, his expression carefully crafted. Oh, you didn't know? I thought for sure he would have told you by now. He set the photo down with exaggerated care, the soft thud seeming to echo in the quiet room. It was just a silly bet at the diner. We were all giving him a hard time, saying he didn't have the guts to marry the girl with the crutches. The blood drained from Simone's face, leaving her feeling cold and hollow. Her legs, which had grown so strong through months of determination and physical therapy, suddenly felt weak beneath her. She gripped the edge of the sofa to steady herself, her knuckles turning white with the effort. "You're lying," she said, but the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. So many things were falling into place. Derek's sudden appearance in her life, his persistent proposals, his friend's strange behavior at the wedding. Every memory seemed to shift and realign itself with this new, terrible perspective. Why would I lie? Kevin shrugged, a cruel glint in his eyes as he watched her world crumble. Ask him yourself. Ask him about that night at the diner. Ask him why he really came to your house that first day. Simone's mind raced through every memory, every moment she'd shared with Derek, now tainted by this new knowledge. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't get enough air, and her throat burned with unshed tears. "I think you should leave," she managed to say, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. Kevin headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Don't be too hard on him. It was just a joke that got out of hand. Nobody expected him to actually go through with it." The hours until Derek came home felt like an eternity. Simone sat in their living room, surrounded by wedding photos that now seemed to mock her with their captured moments of joy and love. Each tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow to her heart. When she finally heard his key in the lock, her heart started pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Derek walked in with a smile that quickly faded when he saw her face, the joy in his expression melting into concern. "Simone, what's wrong?" She looked up at him, tears threatening to spill over, her whole body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. "Kevin came by today." Derek froze, the color draining from his face. In that moment, before he even spoke, Simone knew it was true. The guilt in his eyes confirmed everything. "He told me about the dare," she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. "About the bet at the diner. About how you and your friends thought it would be funny to see if you could marry the girl with the crutches." Derek took a step toward her, his hands outstretched in desperation. "Simone, please." She held up a hand to stop him, unable to bear his touch. "Was any of it real?" The tears were falling freely now, hot trails down her cheeks. "Was I just some bet to you?" Simone moved through their bedroom like a ghost, pulling clothes from hangers and stuffing them into her suitcase with trembling hands. Her movements were determined, mechanical, as if running on autopilot. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away furiously, refusing to let them fall. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows felt like a cruel reminder of all the peaceful moments they'd shared in this room. "Please, just let me explain," Derek pleaded from the doorway, his knuckles white where he gripped the frame. His voice cracked with desperation, rough with emotion. "It started as a dare, yes, but everything changed. What I feel for you now is real. So real, it scares me." "Real?" Simone whirled around, clutching a pale blue blouse to her chest like armor. "Was it real when you and your friends laughed about the girl with crutches? Was it real when you made that bet?" Her voice trembled with anger and hurt, each word sharp as broken glass. The memory of Kevin's revelation played on repeat in her mind, poisoning every happy memory. Derek took a step forward, his hands raised in supplication. "I was stupid. I was immature. But these past months with you were a lie." Simone zipped her suitcase closed with such force the sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Her wedding ring caught the light as she moved, another painful reminder of promises broken. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and dialed her sister, her fingers shaking, but sure. "Sarah, I need to use the beach house." Her voice steadied as she spoke, drawing strength from the familiar connection. Yes, I'll explain everything when I get there. No, I'm fine. Or I will be. Derek followed her down the stairs, his footsteps heavy behind her, each one seeming to echo with regret. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. Please, just give me a chance. Talk? Simone stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face him. Her eyes, usually so warm and full of love, were now distant storms. You had months to talk, Derek. Months to tell me the truth. Instead, I had to hear it from Kevin, of all people. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? She dragged her suitcase to the front door, pausing only to grab her car keys from the hook. The same hook where, just that morning, they'd bumped hands reaching for their keys and shared a laugh about being late for work. The memory made her chest ache, with a pain so sharp it stole her breath. I'll send someone for the rest of my things, she said, her voice hollow, empty of the warmth that had once filled their home. Don't try to contact me. I mean it, Derek. Simone, please. Derek's voice broke, splintering like their marriage. I love you. I love you so much it hurts. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob, her shoulders tensing beneath her lightweight sweater. For a moment, just a moment, she wavered, the weight of their shared history pressing against her resolve. Then she remembered Kevin's smirking face as he revealed the truth over coffee that morning, the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, and her resolve hardened like steel. If you loved me, she said quietly, each word measured and final, you would have told me the truth yourself. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through Derek's entire body, reverberating in the hollow space where his heart used to be. Through the window, he watched her load her suitcase into her car, her movements quick and efficient, watched her slide into the driver's seat, her back straight and proud, despite everything, watched her drive away without looking back, taking with her all the light and warmth from his world. The house felt impossibly large and empty without her presence, a museum of memories he could no longer touch. Derek wandered from room to room like a man lost at sea, surrounded by reminders of their life together. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, half full and long cold, a lipstick stain marking where she'd last sipped. Her favorite throw blanket, soft and worn from countless movie nights, lay draped over the arm of the couch where she'd left it that morning. In their bedroom, no, his bedroom now, her perfume still lingered in the air like a ghost. The closet door stood open, showing the empty spaces where her clothes had hung beside his, the gaps like missing teeth in a familiar smile. The sight hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Derek sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, fingers gripping his hair as if the physical pain could distract from the emotional agony. The magnitude of what he'd lost crashed over him in waves, each one threatening to pull him under. Not just his wife, but the woman who had challenged him to be better, who had shown him what real strength looked like, who had made him want to be worthy of her love. The woman who had seen past his facade and loved the person he could be, rather than the person he was. And he had thrown it all away because he'd been too much of a coward to tell her the truth, too afraid of losing her to realize that his silence would cost him everything. The silence of the house pressed in around him, broken only by the steady tick of the clock on the wall, the vintage one Simone had bought at an antique store 3 weeks after their wedding, her eyes bright with excitement over the find. Each tick seemed to mock him now, counting down the seconds in a life that no longer held the promise it had just hours ago, each moment taking him further from the happiness he'd carelessly destroyed. Derek sat at his kitchen table, a blank piece of paper before him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden surface, highlighting the coffee stains and water rings, marks of their shared breakfasts that now felt like memories from another life. His fingers traced one of the rings absently, remembering how she always set her mug in exactly the same spot. He picked up his pen and began to write, his normally messy handwriting carefully controlled as he poured his heart onto the page, each letter formed with deliberate precision. Dear Simone, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know the truth. All of it. That night at the diner, I was a different person. Shallow, immature, desperate for approval from people who didn't matter. Then I met you. His hand trembled as he wrote, but he forced himself to continue, gripping the pen tighter to steady his nerves. He detailed everything, the dare, his initial intentions, and how meeting her had changed him. How her strength had shown him what real courage looked like. How her love had made him want to be better. With each word, the weight of his actions pressed harder against his chest. When he finished the letter, his eyes were burning and his hand ached. A few teardrops had smudged some of the words, making them blur together like his emotions. He folded the paper carefully, sliding it into an envelope with trembling fingers. He'd have Sarah deliver it to Simone. At least her sister still answered his texts, even if only with curt responses that made his heart sink every time. That afternoon, Derek walked into Joe's construction company. The office smelled of sawdust and coffee, with a hint of metal and fresh paint lingering in the air. Joe, a barrel-chested man with gray-streaked hair and weathered hands, looked up from his desk covered in blueprints and permit applications. No experience necessary? Derek asked, holding up the Help Wanted sign he'd taken from the window, trying to keep his voice steady despite his nerves. Joe studied him for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in Derek's clean hands and expensive watch. It's hard work, long hours, hot sun, not exactly what you look used to. That's what I'm looking for, Derek replied, meeting Joe's gaze with determination. Later that day, Derek stood in his bathroom, staring at his reflection in the slightly steamed mirror. He held up the pack of cigarettes he'd carried for years, his crutch during stressful times, the pack now worn and crumpled from being carried in his pocket. With deliberate movements, he crushed the pack and dropped it into the trash, watching it land among the discarded cotton swabs and tissues. His phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Drinks tonight. The usual crew's waiting. Derek's thumb hovered over the keyboard, memories of countless nights wasted in bars, making stupid decisions, flashing through his mind. These were the friends who'd encouraged his worst impulses, who treated Simone like a joke, who'd never challenged him to be better, only dragged him lower. He typed, "No, I'm done." Then he blocked the number, feeling a mix of loss and liberation wash over him. In his bedroom, he packed up his designer clothes, the ones he'd bought to impress others, tags still hanging from some of them, and loaded them into bags for donation. He wouldn't need them for construction work anyway. Each item represented a piece of his old self he was ready to leave behind. As evening settled over the house, Derek sat on the back porch where he and Simone used to watch the sunset together. His muscles already ached from his first day of physical labor, but it was a good ache, an honest one, the kind that meant real change. He looked down at his hands, already showing signs of roughness from just one day of work, small blisters forming on his palms. "I'll prove I'm not that man anymore," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible above the evening crickets. The words floated away on the evening breeze, a promise to himself and to Simone, even if she couldn't hear it. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, the same colors that used to reflect in her eyes as they sat here together. Simone sat on the weathered deck of her family's beach house, watching the waves roll in with rhythmic persistence. The salty breeze tugged at her braids as she wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the evening chill. 2 weeks had passed since she'd learned the truth about Derek's bet, and each day felt like another weight added to her already heavy heart. Her friend Maya perched on the wooden railing, holding out a steaming mug of tea, wisps of steam curling in the ocean air. "You need to stop torturing yourself," she said gently, her voice full of concern. "He played you, plain and simple. Guys like that don't change." Simone accepted the tea, but shook her head, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "It's not that simple." She thought about the way Derek had looked at her during their morning walks, how his eyes had lit up with genuine pride when she'd taken her first steps without crutches. The memory of his steadying hand on her elbow still lingered. Inside, her sister Sarah lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her feet propped up on a throw pillow. "He sent another message asking about you," she announced, glancing up. "And he's working construction now. Can you believe it? Mr. Designer Clothes doing manual labor? The guy who used to complain about getting his shoes dirty?" "He's probably just trying to get sympathy," Maya scoffed, crossing her arms. "Classic manipulation tactic." But Simone remembered their conversations about self-improvement, how Derek had listened intently when she talked about building her business from nothing. There had been real understanding in his eyes, real admiration. She recalled how he'd started taking notes during their talks, jotting down ideas for his own future. "You know what hurts the most?" Simone set down her tea, watching the ripples in the liquid settle. "Not the bet itself, but the fact that he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth himself, after everything we've been through together." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deck as her friends continued their well-meaning attempts to help her move on. They reminded her of other men who had disappointed her, of how she deserved better, of how she was strong enough to start over. Their voices blended with the sound of crashing waves, a chorus of concern and protection. But their words couldn't erase the memories of quiet moments. Derek bringing her water during physical therapy sessions, his genuine laugh when she teased him, the way he'd started making the bed every morning without being asked. She remembered finding him reading relationship books when he thought she was asleep, his face serious in the dim light. Later that evening, after her friends had left, Simone sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her childhood room. Their wedding photo stood on the nightstand. She hadn't been able to bring herself to put it away. In it, Derek wasn't looking at the camera. Instead, his eyes were fixed on her, filled with an emotion that couldn't be faked, a tenderness that made her throat tight even now. She picked up the frame, running her finger along the edge, tracing the path of their shared memories. The man who had accepted that cruel bet at the diner wasn't the same one who had held her hand through every doctor's appointment, who had celebrated each small victory in her recovery as if it were his own. That earlier version of Derek would have run at the first sign of difficulty. The Derek she'd first met would never have taken such a job. He'd been too concerned with appearances, too focused on impressing his shallow friends. Now he came home with calloused hands and tired eyes, but also with a new sense of purpose she'd never seen in him before. What if he really has changed? She whispered to the photograph, her heart aching with the possibility. The question hung in the air, heavy with hope and fear, as the distant sound of waves provided a gentle backdrop to her thoughts. After 3 months of construction work, Derek's calloused hands told the story of his transformation. The physical labor had changed more than just his body. It had cleared his mind and given him purpose. During lunch breaks, he'd studied business plans and watched online tutorials about starting a handyman service, taking careful notes in a worn notebook he kept in his back pocket. Now, sitting in his small rented office space, Derek looked at the freshly printed business cards for Johnson Home Repairs. The logo was simple but professional, just like Simone had taught him. Presentation mattered. He traced the raised lettering with his thumb, remembering how she'd explained the importance of branding when she started her own business. The navy blue and silver design reminded him of her eye for detail. "First impressions count," she'd said back then, straightening his collar before an interview. Her gentle touch and encouraging smile had meant everything. The memory made his chest tight with a familiar ache. His phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, another attempt to get him to join the old crowd at the diner. The message was full of the usual taunts about how he'd changed. Derek deleted it without responding. Those days were behind him now, along with the immature games and empty promises. Instead, he focused on organizing his tool inventory and finalizing his service pricing. The small office wasn't much, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a whiteboard covered in to-do lists. But it was his. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the single window, warming the space he'd worked so hard to earn. No more living off charm and quick fixes. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from his church, had given him his first small job fixing her porch steps. She'd offered him lemonade and cookies while he worked, sharing stories about the neighborhood. That led to 3 more referrals, and soon he had regular weekend work. But Derek knew he needed something bigger to prove he could sustain this new path, something that would show he was serious about his future. One morning, while checking his emails at his desk with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, he noticed a message from Riverside Apartments, a large complex on the better side of town. They needed someone to handle their ongoing maintenance and repairs. The property manager had heard about his work from Mrs. Henderson, who apparently hadn't stopped singing his praises to anyone who would listen. Derek spent hours preparing for the meeting, ironing his best shirt and polishing his work boots until he could see his reflection. He brought a detailed proposal, complete with references and pricing options. Everything organized the way Simone had taught him about professional presentations. Her voice echoed in his head as he double-checked every detail. During the meeting, he found himself channeling Simone's confidence, sitting up straight in the chair across from the property manager's desk. "Quality work isn't just about fixing things," he explained to the property manager, his voice steady despite his nerves. "It's about building trust with every job." The property manager studied Derek's portfolio of completed projects, flipping through the pages with careful consideration. "You're newer to the business," he noted, adjusting his glasses. "But Mrs. Henderson speaks very highly of your work ethic. She mentioned you rebuilt her entire garden fence after noticing it was rotting." Derek's heart pounded as the manager reviewed the contract, the ticking of the wall clock seeming impossibly loud. This wasn't just another job. This was his chance to prove he could build something real, something lasting. His future hung in the balance of these few minutes. When the property manager finally looked up and extended his hand, Derek's breath caught in his throat. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desk between them. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Johnson. We'll start with a 3-month trial period." Back in his office, Derek held the signed contract, his hands trembling slightly. This was the biggest opportunity he'd ever earned through his own merit. No shortcuts, no charm, no bets. Just honest work and determination. The weight of the paper in his hands felt like a promise. Looking at the framed business license on his wall, Derek smiled. A sense of pride mixed with longing filled his chest. This is for her, he thought, knowing that someday he'd have to tell her everything, but hoping that when he did, this would help show her who he'd become. Simone's heels clicked against the polished floor of the conference center as she made her way to the small business development seminar. Her assistant had recommended it, mentioning a local success story would be presenting maintenance solutions for property managers. She smoothed down her pencil skirt, a nervous habit she'd developed over years of important meetings. The moment she stepped into the room, time seemed to freeze. There, at the front of the conference room, stood Derek. He wore a crisp navy suit that fit his broader shoulders perfectly, looking nothing like the carefree man she'd married. His once messy blonde hair was neatly trimmed, and his stance radiated a quiet confidence she'd never seen before. A silver watch, one she didn't recognize, glinted at his wrist as he arranged his presentation materials. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Simone felt her breath catch. The familiar warmth in his blue eyes still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. She quickly slid into a seat near the back, trying to steady her trembling hands. The leather portfolio she carried suddenly felt heavy in her grip. Derek paused for just a moment, his professional demeanor wavering slightly, before continuing his presentation. His voice was steady as he discussed how his company had revolutionized maintenance services for several large apartment complexes in the area. The projector hummed quietly behind him as he moved through his talking points with practiced ease. By implementing a digital tracking system, he explained, clicking through his well-organized slides, we've reduced response times by 60%. This means our residents never wait more than 4 hours for urgent maintenance needs. Simone watched, mesmerized, as he handled questions from the audience with patience and expertise. This wasn't the impulsive man who had proposed to her on a dare. This was someone who had built something real, something substantial. She noticed how he'd developed a habit of touching his tie when emphasizing important points, a small gesture that spoke of preparation and professionalism. When he shared a case study about helping elderly residents with accessibility modifications, Simone remembered how he'd once helped her practice walking in their garden. The memory brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, grateful for the dim lighting in the room. The presentation concluded with impressive growth statistics and client testimonials. The audience applauded enthusiastically, and several people rushed forward to exchange business cards with Derek. Simone remained in her seat, her emotions warring between pride and pain. Her fingers absently traced the edge of her notebook, where she'd unconsciously written down several of his key points. She watched as he graciously networked with the other attendees, noting how he gave each person his full attention. No trace remained of the man who used to crack inappropriate jokes to be the center of attention. His laugh, when it came, was genuine but controlled, the mark of someone who had learned to balance warmth with professionalism. As the crowd began to thin, Derek's eyes found hers again. He excused himself from his current conversation and walked toward her, his steps measured and careful, as if approaching a deer that might bolt at any sudden movement. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast shadows across his face, highlighting the subtle changes time had carved into his features. "Simone," he began, his voice softer than it had been during the presentation, carrying echoes of their shared past. The small cafe buzzed with quiet conversation as Simone and Derek sat across from each other at a corner table, tucked away from the mid-afternoon rush of customers. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on their faces and dancing across the polished wooden tabletop between them. Simone wrapped her hands around her vanilla latte, using it as an anchor while she listened to Derek speak, the familiar aroma helping to calm her nerves. "After you left," Derek said, his voice soft but clear, the words carrying the weight of months of reflection, "I realized I'd lost the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because of your success or your home, but because of who you are." He paused, taking a careful sip of his black coffee. No sugar or cream. another small change she noticed. "You showed me what real strength looks like." Simone watched the way his hands trembled slightly as he set down his cup, leaving a faint ring of moisture on the wooden surface. The nervous gesture reminded her of their first coffee date when he'd accidentally knocked over the sugar dispenser, but his eyes held a steadiness she'd never seen before. "I started the construction job because I needed to learn what honest work felt like," he continued, absently rubbing a callus on his palm. "Every morning at 5, hauling materials, following orders, it taught me humility. And every night, even when my muscles ached and my eyes could barely stay open, I'd come home and work on my business plan." A small smile tugged at Simone's lips as she remembered how he used to sleep until noon whenever possible, complaining if anyone dared to wake him earlier. The change wasn't lost on her, nor was the new purpose that seemed to radiate from him. "The whole time," Derek said, his voice catching slightly, emotion bleeding through his carefully maintained composure, "I kept thinking about how you never gave up during your recovery. How you pushed through every setback with grace, even on the days when everything seemed impossible. I wanted to be someone who deserved that kind of strength." He pulled out his phone and showed her photos of his company's first office, a tiny converted garage space with just enough room for a desk and some filing cabinets, the walls freshly painted despite the obvious age of the building. "This is where it started. No shortcuts, no handouts, just hard work and the lessons you taught me about perseverance." Simone studied the pictures, noting the familiar determination in his eyes that she'd once seen in her own mirror during her rehabilitation, back when each small victory felt like climbing a mountain. "I've changed," Derek said, meeting her gaze directly, his shoulders squared despite his obvious nervousness. "Because of you, Simone. You showed me what it means to face challenges head-on, to build something meaningful. The dare might have brought me to your door, but you're the one who opened my eyes to the man I could become." The honesty in his voice made Simone's heart ache. She could see the changes in him. They were written in the calluses on his hands, the confident set of his shoulders, and the humble sincerity in his eyes. Gone was the carefree playboy who treated life like one big game. "I see the difference in you, Derek," Simone said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, leaving invisible patterns in the ceramic. "The man sitting here today isn't the same one who showed up on my porch with that ridiculous proposal, but—" She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I need time to trust you again." A week after their coffee meeting, Simone pulled up to a renovated community center on the east side of town. The brick building had fresh paint and new windows, its facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. What caught her eye was the group of teenagers gathered around Derek in the front yard, their faces animated with interest. He stood there in well-worn work boots and faded jeans, demonstrating how to properly hold a power drill with the kind of confidence that comes from experience. His patience showed in every deliberate movement as he guided a young boy's hands into the correct position, taking extra time to ensure the lesson stuck. "Safety first, Marcus," he said, adjusting the boy's protective goggles with gentle hands. "Remember what we talked about. Respect the tools, respect yourself. That's the foundation of everything we do here." Simone watched from her car for a moment, taking in the scene before her. When Derek had called to invite her to see his youth program, she hadn't known what to expect. But this wasn't just another business venture. There was genuine care and dedication in his interactions with the kids, something that touched her heart unexpectedly. She stepped out of her car, and Derek's face lit up when he saw her, his smile reaching his eyes. "Hey everyone," he called out to the group, waving her over. "This is Ms. Williams. She's the successful entrepreneur I told you about, the one who showed me what real determination looks like." The teenagers turned to look at her with curious eyes, whispering among themselves. A girl with braids like her own stepped forward, confidence in her stride. "Mr. Johnson said you built your business from scratch after getting hurt. That's pretty cool. He talks about you all the time." Simone felt warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of surprise and appreciation. "He told you about that?" "You're kind of our inspiration around here," Derek admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "These kids are learning that setbacks don't define you. They're just part of the journey." He led her on a tour of the center, showing her the workshop where they taught basic construction skills, complete with labeled tool stations and safety procedures posted on every wall. The computer lab for business planning hummed with activity, and a small but well-organized library was filled with books on entrepreneurship, each section carefully curated. Every room held evidence of careful thought and genuine commitment to the student's success. "The construction company helps fund this place," Derek explained as they watched two girls work meticulously on a birdhouse design, their heads bent together in concentration. "Most of these kids come from tough situations. They need to know there's a path forward, that someone believes in them." A boy rushed up to Derek, holding a completed wooden toolbox with pride radiating from his face. "Mr. Johnson, look, I finished it. Even did the corners like you showed me." Derek's face broke into a proud smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's excellent craftsmanship, Tony. Look at those perfect joints. What do you say we add some paint tomorrow? Maybe that blue you were talking about?" The boy nodded eagerly before running off to show his friends, clutching his creation. Simone noticed how naturally Derek moved through the space, offering encouragement here, a gentle correction there, a fist bump, or a word of praise when needed. This wasn't the same man who'd approached her porch on a dare. This was someone who'd found his purpose, who'd grown into something more. "We're starting a mentorship program next month," he said, leading her to a bulletin board covered in community announcements and student success stories, pairing successful local business owners with our students. "I was hoping—" He hesitated, glancing at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Well, these kids could learn a lot from someone like you. Your story really resonates with them." Simone watched as a group of teenagers gathered around a workbench, their faces focused in concentration as they measured and marked their materials. She saw the same determination she'd felt during her own recovery, the same drive to prove themselves against the odds. The atmosphere in the center was charged with possibility and purpose. "Maybe you're not the same man after all," she said with a faint smile, her words carrying more weight than she'd intended. Simone sat in her beach house living room, Derek's letter trembling in her hands. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the pages filled with his familiar handwriting. The sound of crashing waves outside provided a soothing backdrop to her racing thoughts. "Dear Simone," she read again, her finger tracing each word, "I know words aren't enough to make up for what I did. The truth is, I was a fool who took a stupid bet because my pride meant more to me than treating people with respect. But meeting you changed everything. You showed me what real strength looks like, what it means to face challenges head on and never give up." Her eyes welled with tears as she continued reading, the paper crinkling slightly in her trembling grip. "The community center isn't just a business. It's my way of trying to be the kind of person you believed I could be. Every day I teach these kids about respect, hard work, and integrity, the very things I learned from you. They remind me of who I used to be and who I want to become." Simone folded the letter carefully and placed it in her purse, her movements deliberate and measured. Without giving herself time to second-guess her decision, she grabbed her car keys and headed for the door, pausing only to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. The drive to Derek's office took 30 minutes, each mile bringing fresh waves of nervousness and anticipation. Her heart pounded as she parked outside the modest building with Johnson Construction and Youth Services written on the front in bold professional lettering. Through the window, she could see Derek at his desk, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, completely focused on the paperwork before him. His face showed the same determination she'd always admired. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she walked inside. The receptionist, a friendly-looking woman in her 50s, started to announce her, but Simone shook her head and moved quietly toward his office. She paused in the doorway, watching him work, noticing how he'd matured since she'd last seen him. Derek looked up and froze, his pen hovering above the document he'd been signing. "Simone," he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might make her disappear. His eyes widened with a mixture of hope and disbelief. She held up his letter, now slightly worn from her repeated readings. "I got this today." He stood slowly, uncertainty written across his face, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "I meant every word." "I know," she said softly, glancing at the photographs of smiling kids on his office walls. "I can see it in everything you've built here, in the way those kids look up to you." Derek stepped around his desk but kept his distance, respecting her space. His hands fidgeted slightly at his sides. "I was lost before I met you, Simone. Caught up in trying to impress people who didn't matter, making choices that hurt others. You showed me there was a better way to live." Tears spilled down Simone's cheeks as she moved closer to him, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "The man who made that bet would never have built this place," she said, gesturing to the office and the community center beyond. "He wouldn't have cared enough to make a difference in these kids' lives." "I'm not that man anymore," Derek's voice cracked with emotion, his eyes glistening. "I haven't been since the day I really got to know you." Simone closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. Derek held her close as tears fell freely between them, his familiar cologne bringing back a rush of memories. "I believe you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I believe in who you've become." A week after their reunion, Derek spent hours meticulously setting up the perfect surprise at the community center. He transformed the main activity room into an intimate space, with warm white lights strung across the ceiling in delicate patterns and carefully curated photos of their journey together displayed on the walls. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow across the polished wooden floor. Each image told their story in vivid detail. Their first coffee date, where Simone had challenged his assumptions over steaming mugs and nervous smiles. Her determined practice sessions in the park, where she'd pushed through countless setbacks. Their wedding day, when she'd walked down the aisle, unaided with tears of triumph in her eyes. And newer photos of them working side by side with the youth at the center, their faces bright with purpose and joy. Derek's hand shook as he adjusted the last frame, a picture of their tearful reunion in his office just days ago. The kids from his mentorship program, ranging from ages 8 to 16, had helped him set everything up, their excitement barely contained as they whispered and giggled while waiting for Simone to arrive. They'd spent the afternoon hanging streamers and arranging flowers, invested in making this moment perfect. When Simone walked in for what she thought was a regular evening meeting, she stopped dead in her tracks. The room fell completely silent as her eyes took in the transformed space, lingering on each photograph that captured their journey together. The fairy lights twinkled above, creating a magical atmosphere that made the moment feel surreal. "Derek?" she whispered, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with wonder. He walked toward her slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. The kids gathered around them in a perfect semicircle, holding handmade signs they'd spent hours decorating that spelled out, "Will you marry me?" again. Their eyes sparkled with anticipation and joy. "Simone," Derek began, taking her trembling hands in his, "our first wedding started with a lie, but it led to the most honest love I've ever known. You made me want to be better, not for a bet, not for show, but for real. You showed me what true strength looks like." Tears glistened in Simone's eyes as she looked at their surrounding family of mentees, each young face beaming with hope and excitement. Some of the kids were bouncing on their toes, barely able to contain their enthusiasm. "These kids," Derek continued, gesturing to the group around them, his voice thick with emotion, "they remind me every day what it means to grow, to learn from mistakes, to become someone worthy of trust and respect. Just like you taught me, they've shown me the same patience and forgiveness you did." He dropped to one knee on the smooth wooden floor, pulling out a simple silver ring that caught the light. "I want to marry you again, Simone. This time with no secrets, no bets, no hidden motives. Just pure love and truth between us. A fresh start we both deserve." The children held their breath, some clutching each other's hands in anticipation. One small girl with pigtails couldn't contain herself and whispered loudly, "Say yes, Miss Simone." Her voice echoed in the quiet room, making several others giggle nervously. Simone laughed through her tears, looking from the eager faces of the kids to Derek's hopeful expression. Her voice filled with emotion, she smiled and said, "Yes." The word rang out clear and true, followed by an explosion of cheers and applause from their young audience. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the small garden where Derek and Simone stood facing each other. Unlike their first wedding, this ceremony was truly intimate. Just the two of them, a minister, and the handful of kids from their mentorship program who had become like family. Simone wore a simple cream-colored dress that flowed gently in the breeze, while Derek had chosen a light gray suit that matched the silver streaks of sunset breaking through the clouds. The garden, filled with blooming roses and sweet-smelling jasmine, created a perfect natural altar. "The first time we did this," Derek began his vows, his voice steady and clear, "I didn't understand what marriage really meant. I thought it was just words and papers." He squeezed Simone's hands gently. "But you taught me that real love is about growing together, challenging each other to be better, and standing by each other through the hard times." Tears glistened in Simone's eyes as she listened. The children from their program sat quietly on wooden chairs, some wiping their own eyes, others smiling broadly. "Today," Derek continued, "I promise you complete honesty. I promise to be the man you believed I could become. I promise to wake up every day grateful for your forgiveness and determined to earn your trust." Simone took a deep breath before starting her own vows. "Derek," she said, her voice full of emotion, "our story didn't start perfectly, but it taught us both about the power of change and forgiveness." She paused, squeezing his hands. "I promise to keep believing in you, to support your growth as you've supported mine, and to face whatever comes next together." The minister smiled warmly as he watched them exchange new rings, simple bands inscribed with the word truth on the inside. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, creating a magical backdrop for their renewed promises. "With these rings," the minister said, "you recommit to your marriage, this time built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect." Derek and Simone moved closer together as the minister spoke the final words. The last rays of sunlight bathed them in a warm glow as their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing their renewed vows. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their shared office as Derek and Simone pored over plans for their latest community project. Stacks of papers covered their desks, filled with sketches and budgets for the youth center they planned to build. "If we combine your construction experience with my business connections," Simone said, pointing to a blueprint, "we could make this center twice as big as we originally planned." Derek nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "And with the mentorship program already running strong, we'll have no trouble filling it." He pulled out a folder containing letters from local families interested in the program. They had spent the past 6 months transforming their individual strengths into a powerful partnership. Derek's hands-on experience in construction and his natural ability to connect with troubled youth complemented Simone's sharp business acumen and networking skills perfectly. At their weekly community meeting, Simone presented their vision to a room full of eager supporters. "This isn't just about building walls," she explained, her voice clear and passionate. "It's about creating spaces where kids can dream bigger than they ever thought possible." Derek stood beside her, adding, "Every one of these kids deserves a chance to succeed. We're not just offering programs, we're offering hope." Their presentation drew enthusiastic responses from local business owners. One by one, they stepped forward to pledge support, whether through funding, materials, or volunteer hours. Later that afternoon, they visited their current temporary youth center. The space buzzed with activity as teenagers worked on homework, played basketball, and participated in various workshops. A young girl named Maria ran up to them, clutching a math test. "Look," she exclaimed, showing them her A+ grade. "I did it, just like you said I could, Mr. Johnson." Derek beamed with pride. "See? I told you all that extra practice would pay off." Simone watched as he high-fived Maria, remembering how far he'd come from the man who once took foolish dares. Now he spent his evenings tutoring kids in math and science, using his own past struggles to connect with them. They moved through the center, checking on various activities. In one corner, a group of boys learned basic carpentry skills from one of Derek's construction colleagues. In another, young entrepreneurs presented their business ideas to mentors Simone had recruited from her professional network. "Remember when this was just an empty warehouse?" Derek asked, gesturing around them. Simone nodded, thinking back to their first project together. They had started small, converting this abandoned building into a safe space for neighborhood kids. Now it served over 100 young people daily, with programs running from sunrise to sunset. As they walked through the bustling center, they stopped to talk with volunteers, check on ongoing projects, and offer encouragement to the kids. Their presence brought smiles to faces and sparked enthusiasm in every room they entered. Near the end of the day, they received news that their grant proposal for the new building had been approved. The funding would allow them to break ground on the new youth center within the month. Standing in their office, surrounded by the plans and dreams they'd carefully crafted together, Simone turned to Derek with joy lighting up her face. "We're unstoppable together," she said. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair at the local coffee shop where he'd asked to meet Simone. His usual swagger was nowhere to be seen as he stared into his untouched cappuccino. Simone sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes watchful. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Kevin began, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "About that day I told you about the dare. I wasn't trying to help you or do the right thing. I was just being spiteful because I was jealous of how Derek had changed." Simone took a slow sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch between them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cafe windows, highlighting the nervous sweat on Kevin's forehead. "I wanted to hurt him," Kevin continued, running a hand through his dark hair. "But I ended up hurting you too. And that wasn't fair. You didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of my pettiness." A young barista walked past their table, the clink of dishes providing a momentary distraction. When she passed, Simone leaned forward slightly. You know what's interesting, Kevin, she said, her voice steady and calm. That dare might have started everything for the wrong reasons, but it led to something real. Sometimes good things can come from bad intentions. Kevin looked up, surprised by her response. You're not angry? I was, Simone admitted, for a long time. But look at where we all are now. Derek's not the same person who took that dare. I'm not the same person who fell for him. And you, she gestured at Kevin, you're not the same person who tried to tear us apart. The tension in Kevin's shoulders began to ease. I really am sorry, he said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. Both of you deserve better than what I did. Simone nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. We've all grown, she said. That's what matters now. Later that evening, as Simone recounted the conversation to Derek in their living room, he sat quietly, taking it all in. The warm glow of table lamps cast a cozy atmosphere around them. I can't believe you forgave him so easily, Derek said, shaking his head in amazement. Holding on to anger doesn't help anyone, Simone replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Besides, if I can forgive you for taking the dare in the first place, I can forgive him for revealing it. Derek pulled her closer on the couch, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. For your grace, with both of us. Simone rested her head on his shoulder as they sat together, and Derek felt lighter than he had in years. The last weight of his past finally lifted. Evening sunlight streamed into Derek and Simone's shared office, where scattered papers revealed months of youth program planning. Simone reviewed success metrics from her wheelchair, her braids neat and tidy. These numbers are incredible, she told Derek at the window. We're reaching more kids than expected. The mentorship program flourishing, he replied, blue eyes bright. They just needed someone to believe in them. Simone wheeled over. What if we expanded beyond our community? How so? Derek asked, sitting beside her. Globally. Our model works here. Why not worldwide? International expansion? Exactly. Simone moved to their whiteboard. We'll start with other cities, then countries, using our existing framework, mentorship, education, job training. As she mapped connections between regions, Derek joined her. We'd need cultural adaptations, local partnerships. And technology for cross-border connections, Simone added. Virtual classrooms, online training. Am I dreaming too big? No. Let's start with Canada. I have Toronto contacts. They spent an hour planning, Simone working spreadsheets while Derek filled the whiteboard. Their shared purpose energized the room. We could help so many people, Simone said, reviewing their outline. Derek knelt beside her. Remember when I cared about impressing friends? Now we're planning to change the world. Simone squeezed his hand and requested the world map. Together, they marked potential locations, their hearts full of purpose as they planned their future. The City Convention Center's grand ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers as elegantly dressed guests filled the space. Simone sat near the front in her navy blue gown, her braided updo perfect. The host stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, our final award tonight, the Richardson Award for Excellence in Community Service. Simone watched proudly as Derek fidgeted with his bow tie at the nominees' table. This year's recipient has transformed youth mentorship and education, helping over 500 at-risk youth secure jobs and education. Please welcome Derek Johnson. Applause filled the room as Derek walked to the stage, his blonde hair and blue eyes bright under the lights. Thank you, he said, gripping the Crystal Award. 5 years ago, I was selfish and immature, caring only about others' opinions. He found Simone's eyes. Then I met my wife, who changed everything. The spotlight found her as tears formed in her eyes. She showed me true strength while recovering from an accident, never letting it define her. Her determination and business success did that. He raised the award. This honor means everything, but my accomplishments began with her. She believed in me when I couldn't and pushed me to improve. His voice strengthened. She made me who I am. Simone, thank you for teaching me courage and giving me a second chance. You showed me success means proving something to yourself, not others. Simone cried as applause erupted. Derek's eyes, now humble and loving, met hers as he repeated, "She made me who I am." The City Convention Center's grand ballroom hummed with activity as elegantly dressed guests filled the tables beneath glowing crystal chandeliers. At a front table, Simone sat in a navy blue gown that complemented her brown skin. Her braided updo perfect. She watched the nervous nominees, including Derek, fidgeting with his bow tie. The host approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final honor, the Richardson Award for Excellence in Community Service." The room quieted. Simone caught Derek's tense expression and offered an encouraging smile, thinking of their journey since his first visit to her porch. This year's recipient has shown remarkable dedication to youth mentorship, helping over 500 at-risk youth find opportunities. Congratulations, Derek Johnson. Applause filled the room. Derek walked to the stage, his blonde hair and blue eyes bright under the lights as he accepted the award. "Thank you," he started shakily. 5 years ago, I was selfish and immature, focused on impressing others." He looked at Simone as the spotlight found her tearful face. "But my wife changed everything. She showed me real strength while recovering from an accident, never letting it define her. Her determination and success as a businesswoman did." He raised the award. "This honor means everything, but every life I've helped change started with her. She believed in me when I couldn't." As tears streamed down Simone's face, she saw how her husband's former cockiness had transformed into genuine humility. Meeting her eyes, Derek lifted the award and said, "She made me who I am." Derek and Simone sat on their wraparound porch's wooden swing, sharing a blanket in the crisp morning air. Steam rose from their coffee mugs as dawn's golden light emerged. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Derek asked softly, sunlight catching his blonde hair. Simone leaned into him, inhaling his cologne. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like forever." Their garden stirred with birdsong as dew glittered on their roses. The white picket fence Derek had painted gleamed. "Remember when you first came here?" Simone teased. "You nearly tripped over my crutches." Derek chuckled. "I was terrified. You were this amazing, successful woman, and I had all the wrong reasons. But look at you now," Simone squeezed his hand. "Award-winning leader, businessman, and a man who learned to love completely." They watched the sunrise paint the sky pink and orange. "What I love most about us," Derek said, "is how we grew. You taught me integrity, while you learned to trust again." Simone reflected on their journey from a dare to heartbreak to forgiveness and their community impact. Their anniversary oak tree cast shadows across the lawn. "I thought our wedding was my happiest day," Derek said, "but every day gets better." Simone faced him, eyes bright. "The best is yet to come." Derek pulled her close as they gazed toward their future. If you enjoyed the story of Derek Johnson, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.